In this video, we're going to look at how to utilize a Bootstrap distribution to create a confidence interval. And so this is going to come from section 3.2 in your book. So notice this header right here says Bootstrap confidence intervals. So if you're going to create a confidence interval from a Bootstrap distribution, you are in this section right here of StatKey. And notice that we've got confidence interval, and then we've got the different types of statistics that we've talked about in the course. So we could work with a single mean, median, or standard deviation, a single proportion, a difference in means, a difference in proportions, or slope and correlation. So the first thing you want to do, once you know that you want to create a Bootstrap distribution, is you need to figure out which of these types you're working with. So we're going to start out by looking at a single mean. So I'm going to click here. And so just like anything else that we've looked at in the StatKey, we have the option of either choosing one of the pre-built data sets, or we could enter our own data set by clicking Edit Data or uploading a file. So we're just going to show this using one of the pre-built data sets. So we're going to look at the price of Mustangs. Now, recall that when creating a Bootstrap distribution, what we're going to do is we're going to start out with an original sample. And so right here, StatKey is going to give us the original sample information. Then to create a Bootstrap distribution, what we're going to do is we're going to generate many Bootstrap samples from that original sample. So to do this, we can start by clicking Generate One Sample. Now notice here, StatKey is now going to give us the information for this Bootstrap sample. Notice that it also has a sample size of 25, and that is by definition. Anytime we take a Bootstrap sample from the original sample, they have to have the same sample size. Then what it did was it calculated the mean, the median, and the standard deviation for this particular Bootstrap sample. And what it's doing here is it's going to plot the mean. Now, how do I know that it's plotting the mean? Notice here it says Bootstrap dot plot of mean. If we had wanted to look at one of the other statistics, we could choose from this drop down. But we're just going to stay with the mean. We could generate a second Bootstrap sample. And so now notice as I hover between the 2 points, it's going to change the Bootstrap sample information. So notice the interface here looks very similar to when you created sampling distributions, but the big difference here is up here when we work with Bootstrap samples or Bootstrap distributions, we start out with the original sample, which is unchanging, whereas when we worked with the sampling distribution, you had population information here. So we can go ahead and generate many samples. So let's generate 3,000. So now notice we've got ourselves a Bootstrap distribution. We saw that Bootstrap distribution should be approximately bell-shaped, and this one is approximately bell-shaped. We also know that a Bootstrap distribution should be centered at the statistic from the original sample. So notice that the center of this distribution is at 15.92, and the mean from the original sample was 15.98. So these are very close. And then finally, the standard deviation of the Bootstrap distribution is equal to the standard error, which is 2.144. And so you would need this information to calculate a confidence interval. Now, it ends up that we can also use what's called the percentile method with a Bootstrap distribution to create a confidence interval. And so this comes from that last part of chapter 3. So how can we do this? What we're saying is if I want to create a 95% confidence interval, what I could do is look at where 95% of these dots fall. So in StatKey, this is really easy to do. If we click on two-tail, StatKey will automatically put 0.95 of the dots in the center, and everything else it's going to color in red. So these two values at the bottom, these two endpoints, these give us our confidence interval. So this would be a 95% confidence interval for this data. Now what if instead we had wanted a 99% confidence interval? Well, what we could do by the percentile method is we could put 0.99 here, And notice it's going to give us a 99% confidence interval. So this is how we can create a bootstrap distribution in StatKey, as well as create a confidence interval with any percentage confidence that we want using the percentile method. Let's look at a second example. I'm going to go back to StatKey. But now, instead of a bootstrap confidence interval for a mean, let's look at one for a difference in proportions. So I'm still going to look at this bootstrap confidence interval section, but I'm going to click on difference in proportions. Okay. The original sample information is given and summarized here. Again, I could use one of the default data sets, or I could enter my own. So let's start by generating a single sample. Notice that the bootstrap sample information appears here, and that the difference in the proportions is given right here. So this is the bootstrap statistic from this sample, and that is the statistic that's plotted here. Now I could continue this and generate many samples. Notice we've got a bootstrap distribution that is approximately bell-shaped. It is centered at 0.151, which is very close to the true population difference in proportions, which is not the population, which is very close to the difference in proportions for the original sample, when that statistic is given right here. Also, the standard error for this distribution is given right up here at the top. Now again, if we wanted to use the percentile method to build a confidence interval for this difference in proportions, we could click on two-tail. By default, StatKey starts with a 95% confidence interval, but we could change that to whatever percentage we wanted. Perhaps we wanted a 75% confidence interval. Notice now it gives me the 75% confidence interval using the percentile method.